Good evening and welcome. Boy, that is loud in my headphones. I lost track of what I said. Okay, let me try that again. Hey, good evening and welcome. It is time once again for CU Immigration here on WRFU LP, Urbana 104.5 FM. I will be your host for this evening. My name is Mr. Garza, and I'm here to let you know that WRFU is an open forum for the Urbana-Champaign community. Views expressed are those of the speakers and are not intended to represent WRFU, UCIMC, Urbana Socialist Forum, or, as we like to say on this show, UPTV. So whose views are these? Well, that's a good question. These views are our own. And by our, in this instance, I mean myself and my charming guest, who will introduce herself while I am playing with the volume to get it right.
I'm Carly Trosclair. I'm a visual artist living and working in St. Louis, Missouri. Visual artist meaning that I create sculpture, full room environments and installations for people to enter and experience, and they're typically based around architecture. So
at this moment, the listener, the one person who's listening,
yes.
is probably wondering to themselves, wait a minute, you just said this was CU Immigration, and you've got an artist on. What's up with that, Tom? And my answer to that would be, you know what? I had a guest canceled. I was going to cancel the show because I didn't really have anything to talk about. And then you and I were talking earlier today about something entirely different. And I thought, hey, I'm interested in your work. I want to know more about it. I have a radio show.
Here we are.
Here we are. So that's the short explanation for why this is Art Talk.
Art Talk.
So this is not CU Immigration, this is Art Talk today. And we're here to talk about art. Sorry, I'm adjusting volumes as I go here. It seems very loud. Hello? Test? Okay. So, on Art Talk, did I just kick you?
You did.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Excuse me. We're very professional here, as
Yes,
you
yes.
probably have noticed. You may have also noticed that there was no music. There was no automation before we started. And I have no explanation for that. It just wasn't on. And I have no way of doing anything about it because it's in the other room and that's locked. So you'll hear this show and then it'll go back to silence. And that's just the way it is here.
I like that you're just up front, this is just how it's going, and
Yeah.
there's no smoke and mirrors.
Community radio in all its glory.
Yes.
That's exactly what we're presenting. We're modeling community radio in every way at this moment. So I am very interested in your work. I have seen pictures of some of it. I've never actually seen it in person. And I regret that because it seems very cool. And so if I were to be a standard interviewer, I would ask you, what is the inspiration? What is it that drives you to do this particular thing? Because some of the pictures I've seen, they're different. It's not all the same thing over and over and over again. You're not, just redoing the same kind of imagery. There's different sorts of things. So what is it? What is the fundamental motivation for your work?
I think it's changed over the years. The way that it looks maybe changes, or the experience kind of grows and maybe gets more complex, kind of just depending on the environment. But I think a big indicator first is how one experiences art I'm really interested in. Other than just kind of standing and absorbing something visually, I'm interested in engineering an experience that engulfs you in a way to where you're moving around and your exploration of the work is part of that piece. So I'm interested in how we experience and consume art, and also our relationship to architecture. So our body's relationship to architecture, our relationship to architecture over time, the way that a building over time is also mortal in a way, in a sense. So I think architecture and that link to the human body is constantly what I'm going for. And then just over the years, it's evolved to take different forms, whether it be sculptures or I worked with fabric maybe 8 or 9 years ago, and a whole bunch of different carvings and now latex. So it's really kind of jumped around as it's needed to.
So this would be a good point maybe to do two things. One, do you have a website people could check out? And
I
if
do.
so, could you tell them so while they're listening they could be checking it out and they could actually see it, some
Yeah.
of your stuff?
Yeah, sure. So the website is www.carlietrosclair.com. So it's my name, carlietrosclair.com.
Okay. And then for those who don't have a computer handy, can you, this is really hard, but can you sort of describe what it looks like? Like what, if I walked into a room with your art, what would I be seeing?
So I'll describe the most recent project that I worked on that was just in an exhibit in the Olin Art Gallery in Pennsylvania. Essentially what I did was cast different architectural elements of a home. So doors, doorknobs, windows, fireplace, an entire wall, and then kind of reset it up to mimic a domestic setting. And it's casted in latex. So the process is a liquid that then over time dries after multiple layers of application. And then I peel it off the surface and it takes an imprint of whatever I initially added it to. So it's kind of like if you would think of doing some kind of like rubbing, it's kind of like picking up a textured surface.
Yeah.
So then the material ends up looking like what it came from. So you'll be looking at a door, but it doesn't quite look like a door because it's this weird yellowish, plasticky, rubbery looking material. So it ends up being a material that to the touch is fluid, like maybe a fabric, but also a little sturdy, like a rubber glove. So it has like kind of structural, it can hold a form, but it's still malleable.
Okay. So to be clear, you're not making a mold and then filling it with something, and then the thing that comes out is an exact recreation. You're making a mold of something. You're putting a material on the outside of it, peeling that off, and that mold becomes your art.
Right. So I'm
Essentially.
interested. Yeah, that's exactly it. So I'm interested in the negative, and I'm not like kind of recreating it to present it as like another iteration of what it, like of a positive. So I'm more interested in like the imprint and the kind of almost like just the surface of it in kind of this negative liminal space between like what it existed as and then kind of its lifespan, into the future, how it gets used at a later date or something.
Okay. Because I've not seen the work in person, of course, sadly, I must say. But having seen pictures, I would describe it, if I were referencing this for the listener, I would describe it as kind of ghostly in a way, because it looks like a sort of a shimmery, semi-transparent image of a solid thing that isn't quite the same exact shape. It's the shape, but it's almost like if it were in a cloud and the wind blows and the clouds just kind of warp. It's like the shape. It's very hard to describe, but it's a really interesting looking result that you come up with.
I really like that description because it still holds enough of the detail for you to know what the reference point is, but it's just off enough for you to be curious about what it is, what it's made of, how it's holding the form. So it's kind of flipping the reality on its head, like just a tiny bit to kind of change the perspective of the object or whatever it might be that you're looking at.
So it's actually a little unsettling in a way. I mean, not like you're going to walk out and go, I feel queasy. It's nothing like that, but it throws you off. You go in to look at it and you say, oh, I recognize that, but I don't quite recognize it, and it's just weird. It's just off somehow. And that's an interesting kind of reaction, at least that I had from looking at the stuff. I think I mentioned to you, I think I sent you a note about how it reminded me of Salvador Dali and the way he took solid objects and sort of made them melt. So it's like, that thing,
Right.
but you don't know it in that kind of shape or that sort of form. And so that was my reaction to it, was that it reminded me of that in a way.
Yeah, and I think it's also interesting how you would take a solid object and then represent it kind of in a more liquid or, a material or a form that isn't quite the thing that it was initially made of. But that's really what I'm interested in my practice, is taking things that we already have familiarity with, and we can kind of just think about it like, well, we don't even really have to think about it because we know it. So when I'm walking through a house, maybe I don't need to really think about a doorway. I just know that that's where it is, and I walk through it, and I don't have to think much more about it. And but I'm interested in taking the kind of habitual ways that we move through spaces, but then also the things that we encounter in something so familiar as a domestic space that everyone has a relationship to, and kind of creating this uncanny relationship where, it kind of makes you curious and question something that you thought you knew or thought you had a grip on. So then it's like very much a thing that you are experiencing in the now of that material again. It's not just kind of in the back of your subconscious, like, well, I'm walking through a doorway or this door handle. It's now in a different form to where you're like, wait, what is that little notch and this little, and I might have not noticed that on the original that it came casted from, but somehow just in a flipped way, it makes you question it differently, maybe.
So that's what you meant earlier when you were talking about how you're exploring the relationship between people and architecture by sort of pulling their experience with these objects out of their usual rut that you're in when doorknobs 100 times a day, you're grabbing, turn them, blah. That's the extent of your thing. But if you alter that in some way, you force people to think about their relationship with that thing. Like you said, the doorway or the door or the knob or whatever the thing is that you've cast. You're sort of making us being the viewers of your work, rethink our relationship to those objects, right? Is that essentially what you're saying?
Exactly. And I would go maybe a step, I don't know if it's further or a side step to that.
Sideways.
A side step. In addition to, rethinking our relationship, but also thinking about how so many people over time have kind of, with my interest in historic buildings or old buildings, how so many people could have touched that same doorknob, walked through that same space, and how we're kind of sharing. The house exists longer than we do, so we have this kind of shared experiential memory or something in a way that makes us think about a building having a lifespan, but also at the same time, without our upkeep and us constantly making the home fit our needs, it will eventually kind of go back into this deteriorated state once nature has kind of reclaimed it. So it's mortal in that way, and it breaks down just like our bodies do, and it sheds, just like, like just the way we would like exfoliate, or like maybe how like a cicada, sheds its shell, the way that wallpaper is kind of crumbling off, or plaster. It's kind of like leaving this trace of what it once was.
No, it's obvious to me why I would be so interested in and attracted to your work, because I love old houses and buildings, and I'm just fascinated by architecture and the way spaces create and reflect a mood and an ideal of your ideal for this space. I want it to be grand, or I want it to be cozy, or they sort of reflect that, but they also create that to someone who You know, you can walk into the same room that I have tried to make a certain way and experience my desire to create this impression. You know, and I love that about architecture, is that you can create space. You invent space, basically. You've got air and whatever, and then you put up walls and whatever, and you've created a space now that was there before. It was just never defined, and you've defined it in a certain way. So that's why I'm interested in it. What got you interested? I mean, where were you just sitting there one day going, and, you know, how did it come to you, or did it?
I think it was always subconsciously there. I grew up in New Orleans, so I grew up around historic architecture. My dad is an electrician, so I grew up a lot around homes that were being built from the ground up. So walking through a lot of homes and kind of just having that feeling of someone not there yet, but, you know, you can kind of envision where a bedroom might be or the kitchen. And then also in an odd way, like going to a lot of open houses when I was younger, where they would like stage what it would feel like to live in that house for a potential buyer. So I feel like that now, looking back, definitely had some kind of, you know, draw and attachment. And then now being in St. Louis, Missouri, I am around historic architecture, but more specifically around architecture that is neglected and abandoned. And it's kind of hard to not be conscious of that in your everyday kind of landscape. So kind of thinking about the draw to architecture and design and the decoration and the hand that used to be visible in these structures, and then kind of just watch something that was cared so much in the making of it. So brick by brick, you know, building like these historic homes, and now it's kind of just like, let's put up this house that is going to last for 10 years, and who cares about it beyond our lifetime, you know? I think it's an attention to care and to detail and to this kind of home making that you're describing that I really like how you said that, and it really kind of resonates because, you know, I do think about how everything within a house we've created to fit our own bodies, you know, seats and, you know, windows and hallways and all these things. And there's this really lovely book that I'm probably always mentioning. But it's called The Poetics of Space by Gaston Bachelard. And he talks about in this chapter about a bird nesting and how a bird collects, you know, sticks and different rubble, but then it carves out the interior with its own body, and how it becomes so physical and almost to a hindrance of its, you know, like it must be sore, and it's like going through all of this kind of physical carving. And I was just thinking, maybe we're not as touch to touch with the space that we're creating bodily, but there is that same kind of creating, not only with structural, but like decorative kind of ways we want our homes to feel. So it's very kind of parallel, I think.
It's interesting when you said that. I mean, that's such a specific image of a someone, the bird. we'll give them more agency than being, you know, birds. Creating a space exactly to fit them by using their own body as like, this is what I need here, room for this part, and over here, you know, and I'm gonna wiggle my butt around and make some butt room and or whatever, you know, and how we both do and don't do that ourselves. We sort of force everybody to exist like, here are our standards. Well, ceilings will be this high, doors will be this wide, and we got to have an outlet every 6 feet. You know, through standards, we've created a one-size-fits-all sort of way of doing interiors that's very different from the way someone stepping back in time would have built their own structure. You know, they would have gone, okay, this is what the materials I have to work with, what's around here. Here's the room, this looks like a good spot. Here's me, here are my hands, go to it, you know, and I'm going to pile rocks, I'm going to make bricks, I'm going to do whatever to make this space. And I'm sure these handmade spaces were far more idiosyncratic than what architecture has become over time, which is now it's like, I don't care if you're 4 feet tall or 8 feet tall, you're getting this size door, you're getting this size window. You know, it seems like we've gained something in terms of speed and ability to create, and a language that everybody recognizes in terms of like, I know how to use this space because I've been in spaces like this before. You know, you walk into almost any building now, you know what to do. You know where to reach for the light switch. You know where to, find the knob on the door and stuff like that. But at the same time, we've lost something. Am I making sense when I'm getting at it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of it, I mean, we, in a way, we can't like neglect capitalism and the strive for the American dream and all of these like very kind of picture perfect, pocketed, place packaged, things that, it becomes a one size fits all. And I think it has a lot to do with what we value. And I'm also really interested in like who gets to decide value and who gets to decide what beauty, because that's a lot of what I feel like is being lost when the decisions are being made to, when we neglect beauty, like to even say that something's beautiful is kind of like cheesy, it's just like not really valued maybe like it used to be. So, and I think that's kind of my pull towards old architecture. It's just like an architecture that has been abandoned, that just because it's discarded, that doesn't mean there's not, or it has been abandoned and it is deteriorating. It doesn't mean that there aren't still possibilities and ways that we can work to kind of give it life again, like what is too far gone. I think it's a lot of laziness. I think it's a lot of like, we can just, I don't know, however they throw up houses now.
It's almost literally
throwing.
Yeah.
It's like, then there it wasn't.
There it is. Oh, look at that.
Right.
Got a house. Isn't that great? Okay, you can move in. Yeah, you touched on a favorite rant cause of mine, and that is how we define things like beauty and value. That's something that just drives me crazy. I can't count the number of times I've ranted about that, just how capitalism basically destroys I guess subjectivity by turning all value into something that is measured only by how much somebody would pay for it. That is a way of ascribing, that is a kind of value.
Right.
How much would you pay for this?
Yeah.
And you might say, I've got some of those at home and they're a lot more comfortable. That looks like a giant painful thing. I wouldn't pay anything for it.
Yeah.
But it's worth ... I can look it up, see it's an online catalog, it is worth that much, but it's not worth that to you. So, it's like value is I don't know. I don't know. I started and I don't have a way of finishing that. It's
Which
just
is typically how a rant goes.
Yeah. Well, no, I'm usually coming from a certain specific perspective. Like you can't turn art into something that's based on money, because that's not what art is. It's an expression. It's, at least in my opinion, art can best be described by taking something intangible and trying to represent it or recreate it in some tangible form so that it can be passed around.
Right.
So I'm saying, oh, what a beautiful sunset. How can I share that with you when you're not here? Okay, I can take a picture and give it to you. I can make a painting and give it to you. I can write a poem or prose and give it to you. And all of those things will give you some sense, or a song.
Right.
Give you a song, like, oh, the sunset song, All of those things will give you some inkling of what I experienced when I saw that sunset. So to me, that's art. And it can take many different kinds of forms. It doesn't have to be either this or that or whatever. It can be a little of this and a little of that. It can be all these different things. And all of it, the value is in your ability to articulate what it is you're trying to express and the effect it has on a person.
Right.
So if I'm touched by it, that's value. And if you are really good at articulating, that's value too. Mm-hmm. So that's why it annoys me that, but how much would you pay? Well, there's lots of things that I think are great that I wouldn't necessarily pay for.
Yeah.
And lots of things I pay for that I don't really think are that great.
Right. And I think, I'd be remiss not to say that artists need to make money. So,
yes,
at the same time, there is the hard end of, putting a price tag on art and making a statement about its value and your value and your perspective of what you're bringing to a conversation. And I think people don't value that. It's almost like people that I'm talking about like the Pier 1 art buyers, who are just like, well, that's pretty, and that goes over my couch. They're not like contemplating anything beyond that Pier 1 painting just becomes like another doorknob, another window. It's like, and you pass it. It's not like making you self-reflect. It's not potentially making you angry. I was recently attending a panel and someone was talking about like purchasing art, and one of the panelists were like, I love buying art that pisses me off because at least it makes me feel something and it challenges me. And I don't think we are trained to know what that means, to feel speculative and challenged and even self-reflective, to even understand how to look at art. How can if we don't practice self-reflexivity and how do we even look to any kind of art form to know what that would be like if art did that for us?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. If you don't do it generally, then how would you recognize it in this instant?
How would you recognize the value of an artwork doing that?
Yeah. How do you know what that is that it's doing to you?
Because otherwise it's just like a lamp.
Makes me uncomfortable.
Right.
So we all experience that with like movies, films.
Sure.
You go to one like, oh man, that was intense. Why? What was intense about it? Was it just action packed? Did you make you feel something? Did it remind you're right. I don't think a lot of people get past just the effect. They don't think of why there's an effect, why it affected them and not you. Why were you crying at that scene and I was laughing?
Right.
That's weird. What does that mean about both of us?
Right. And that and then that's what it's all about, is like really understanding these like weird things about like one another and how they overlap and relate. Like, I love movies that I don't understand the ending because I'm thinking about them forever. I'm just like, what the hell did that mean? Where someone else could just be like, oh, I need to know. I need to know. And it's almost like having that uncertainty and needing that like loop closed for some people. It's just like, well, I don't want to think about it. I want to be able to understand it. I want to see it. I want to know it. I want to say, that's a happy movie. That's a sad movie.